It's just the whole span of the social sciences he covered, and with a lot of modesty he did that. So for me it's a special occasion to be speaking in his memory. It also feels wonderful to be back in Patna after many years. I've done occasional visits, including my first visit as a small child with my father years ago, and after that many subsequent visits. I have to say one rather memorable incident, maybe 14, 15 years ago. Because of my, as was mentioned just now, 7 years in the policy world, in the World Bank as Chief Economic Advisor to the Indian government, I would of course get to talk to lots of finance ministers, chief ministers, conversations about policy making. But the only time I've had one of them come and sit and listen to a full lecture of mine was in Patna, and so it's very memorable. When about 15 years ago I came and started my long lecture on the measurement and details about anti-poverty policies, Sri Nitish Kumar came in, and with no fanfare, no pushing and jostling, just sat in the front row, and from the first or second minute I was thinking how soon is he going to leave the audience, but he sat through the full lecture. So it's a very, very memorable thing for me. This was the early days of Nitish Kumar as Chief Minister over here. So friends, it's a great pleasure to be here. But the topic that I'm talking about is not all pleasant. It's the trouble that the world economy is in. So let me plunge with happy memories into rather the unhappy situation in the world today. The whole world economy is going through a very, very difficult phase. Maybe one of the most difficult phases in recorded history. It's happening because of complex reasons to do with the rise of technology. Usually, when you get a big technological advance, new methods of production coming into play, at one level it is good news. You've got new technology, the world has the capacity for bigger production. But because a new technology changes human relationships, creates new opportunities, the complexities can at times be destabilizing for the world. And something similar is happening over here today, is with the rise of digital technology, the advance over the last 40, 50 years, at one level we are better off, the world can produce much more, but it's also creating a challenge of a kind that we have not seen. And we can see this around the world, in India and virtually any country in the world. Politics is getting polarized, society is getting divided, and this is really something that we should feel troubled about and try to repair and make amends for, because the technology is a blessing, but the technology is being used in ways which is causing all kinds of problems. On top of that, inequality, human inequality is rising to levels beyond comprehension. I personally do feel that the way when we look back now in periods of slavery and ill practices in the world, and we wonder how did people live with such awful practices. I like to believe that a time will come when we will look back at today's world and we will be wondering how did we tolerate so much inequality. Some inequality there will be in society, that's what creates the incentive for production and a society to progress, but not the level of inequality that we have today, from stark poverty to endless amounts of wealth. These are all challenges of our time, and the COVID and right now the Ukraine war threw a spanner into a problem that was building up. The COVID-19 crisis has caused a very interesting problem that is now being written about. Usually, when you have new technology which has come into place, it takes time for people to master the technology and to use it. So even if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, which started roughly in 1750, new technology was coming in, and over 100 years, people were getting used to using this technology. Think of the digital technology, of using internet connections, talking to people far away. This digital technology has been with us for about 30, 40 years now. But because of the COVID-19 crisis, there is a term in economics called learning by doing. that the best way to learn something is by doing it. Kenneth Arrow, one of the great economists, wrote theoretical mathematical work about learning by doing. But in today's world, this technology of Zoom, of WebEx, we have all got used to it. Learning by doing over a very short period. I remember in the beginning, just barely 2 years ago, doing international meetings, giving lectures, I would be fumbling as to how to use this technology. No longer. I've done it so many times, and with most people you're getting used to it. So the way the technology is coming to life has been much faster than what we would have expected, and this is what is causing a lot of the challenge. Let me just give you one instance from history, and then I will come into contemporary times. The Industrial Revolution is a very good example. When the Industrial Revolution happened and ordinary labor was being displaced by machines, and the ordinary weavers were being thrown out by machines coming in that could do the same job much faster. Now it looks like a blessing. We are in a world much more prosperous than before the Industrial Revolution. But if you think of the first 50, 60 years of the Industrial Revolution, for the world it was one of the most challenging times, because one is the new industries were creating pollution at a level that we did not know how to handle. The skies were getting dark, and children as young as 8 years, 9 years old were working for 10 hours, 12 hours a day. You know, the percentage of children doing full-time work in England at that time was about 3 times the children working in India, in developing countries nowadays. So large amounts of children were working, and people get used to it, of course. So those days, when the first conversation started that we are damaging our children by making them work from the age of 8, 10 hours a day, you're not giving them education, you're not giving them any skills. There would be some of the wealthier classes that would say that no, children must work 8 hours, 10 hours a day, because that builds character. They would not build the character of their own children that way, but other people's children, the working class children, that was fine. Fortunately, all that began to change. 2 things happened during the Industrial Revolution. New policies which now look like very ordinary, was started, which that time was revolutionary. I'll give you 2 examples. Restrictions on child labor. That children should not be allowed to work more than a certain amount. Initially it was just a few hours. It was not 0, but you put restrictions. So those laws were seen as very, very novel laws. Then in 1842, for the first time, Britain started taxing people's income. And that was considered shocking. How can you have an income tax? Now it looks normal. Likewise, in today's world, we will have to think of novel policies as to how to get out of the situation, and the blessing that comes with new technology should help us. Let me give you one more piece of number. Before the Industrial Revolution, up to about, say, 1820, so the Industrial Revolution has already started. We know from data over 300 years that the world economy used to grow at roughly 0.3% per annum. So growth rate was 0.3% per annum average. After the Industrial Revolution, lot of turmoil, but when everything settled down, we saw that from about 1890 onwards, growth rate had gone up to 2.1% per annum for the world. So from 0.3%, it had shot up to 2.1%. The Industrial Revolution had been absorbed. Right now, don't take this last 1 or 2 years, the whole world has been in trouble. But before that, the global growth rate, the world economy grows at roughly 3% per annum. If the way the Industrial Revolution ultimately helps society, this helps our society, the world's growth rate is going to come out much higher than what is happening now. But there are challenges on the way. And for those challenges, there is one more ingredient you need. You do need policy, novel policy, but you also need the mind, the intellect, to understand the world. That is also extremely important. It's a combination of 2. You know, economics is a very strange discipline. A lot of economics is common sense. Any intelligent person sitting down talking, you don't have to have a background in economics. You look at the world, stare at the world, read your newspapers, you get commonsensical ideas. But there are also parts of economics as precisely done as engineering. And this creates a problem. You don't quite know where the line is, which one is common sense, which one is engineering skills. I can give you one example where it's engineering skill. Auction design, the way to design an auction, is mathematically structured and is beautifully done nowadays, like actually building a bridge. Whereas inflation control, monetary policy is part intuition, part guesswork. You're using all that and doing it. Some of the big intellectual breakthroughs in the past, I must give you historically, because one of their sons came and settled down in India. For me, the exciting period during the Industrial Revolution, there are big breakthroughs that take place. From Adam Smith's work, from 1776 to the work of Karl Marx, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, whole lot of work. But one interesting work is in 1860 by Stanley Jevons. Jevons is trying to understand a question that strikes all of us. How are prices determined? Why is this pen, why does it have a certain price? And why does this watch have a different price? The old understanding was it may be the content of labor that goes into the product that causes differences in prices. Jevons realized one day, 19th of February, because there is a diary entry of Jevons, he said that I've suddenly understood how prices are formed. And he developed the theory of pricing, which is today in economics a central structure of modern economics. This is in 1860, he published his book, and he thought he was the first person who had done it. I greatly admire Jevons for his personality because his book came out in 1862, path-breaking work, giving a new understanding of the modern economy. Before his second edition would come out, Jevons discovered that there was a tragic character in Germany who had done the same work good 10 years before Jevons, but had vanished unknown. Hermann Heinrich Gossen was his name, but to Jevons' credit, in the second edition of his book, Jevons says that actually I don't get credit for this work. The pioneering work was done by a person called Hermann Heinrich Gossen. But the tragedy is Jevons is writing, I don't even know whether this man is alive or dead. I know nothing about him, but I've seen his book, which very few people have read. He had anticipated all the big ideas. The tragedy of Gossen's life is, he was by then dead. Jevons did not know he had died. Gossen was a civil servant all his life, with very interesting ideas. And his parents were very authoritarian and insisted that he must not waste time on writing and reading too much. He should just do practical work. So he had to wait for his parents to die before he started writing his classic work. By then he was also aging. He produced this marvelous work, and he was a pompous man. In the work he writes, I will do for the human sciences what Copernicus did for the stars. I will understand them. But it's a tragic life. He died a disillusioned person. No one knew about his work, and this for the students over here who may be here. Research is a work where you have to be driven by the idea. It's like creating music or art. You are pursuing it for the pleasure of it. It's like one of those fine arts where you do it for the pleasure. If you're lucky, you get discovered. If you're unlucky, you don't get discovered. You do it anyway.